Welcome to the first video in the Foundations of Reading Development series of videos. In this video, I am going to give some background knowledge around language and letters and phonics that will be beneficial as you seek to make sense of subsequent videos. Let's dive in with the big question of what is language? Language is that thing that allows us, when we have an idea or a thought, to share that with another person. In particular here, I'm talking about oral language. It allows us to speak to someone so that they too understand the idea that we have. To this end, language is that sound system through which individuals communicate with one another. And I want to focus in on this sound piece. Before the days of cell phones, before the days of telephones, language was really reliant on how close you were to someone, your physical proximity to them, because they needed to be able to hear you. What would happen if you had this great idea, but you wanted to share it with someone who was far away? You couldn't shout it if they were, let's say, 5 miles away. That just wouldn't work. So that's when written language came into play. Written language makes oral language more durable and transportable. This is where we get that idea of decoding from. When we decode, we take what is on a paper and recreate the oral language that it's attempted to capture. And through written language, we're able to share these ideas in ways that we never were able to before. One of the keys to helping children understand the written language is the development of alphabet knowledge. And when we're talking about alphabet knowledge, we're talking about those upper and lowercase letters, their corresponding sounds, and the meanings that those letters carry. So you'll see a lot of these pieces reiterated over and over again because alphabet knowledge is part of phonemic awareness in a way, because we want kids to understand that sounds are connected to these letters. But alphabet knowledge is particularly concerned with these three criteria. Now, ways to teach the alphabet that are research-based include making sure that kids get a lot of exposure and practice with the various letters of the alphabet, that it's repeated and varied and not too much. And what this means is that kids get a chance, once they have mastered the recognition of an uppercase and lowercase letter, that they don't have to relearn that again. It's also this idea that we really ground our alphabetic knowledge building in small group instruction, working with kiddos who need support learning the same kinds of letters. We also want to make sure that there's multi-component instruction happening, that we're not just teaching the letter itself, but we're also teaching the sound that it makes and encouraging kids to play with those sounds and encouraging them to find those sounds in books or letters in books that they are reading. We also want to make sure that we keep a good pace, and I'm going to talk about this a bit next on the next slide. And then we want to be sure that we're providing extra support as needed for kiddos who aren't quite getting the connections between certain uppercase letters and lowercase letters. One way that alphabet letters have been taught in the past is this idea of a different letter every single week. And so kids go through 26 weeks of alphabet instruction. And this isn't a research-based practice, particularly because of the pacing at which kids experience working through the alphabet. If we went week by week, kids would be nearly 3/4 of the way through the school year and just have gotten through all of the letters. Rather than teaching a letter a week, research recommends that we interleave practice. And what this means is that every day we are doing a bit more focused, a bit smaller teaching on 4 different letters, depending on what letters a child needs. Again, working in those small groups. So getting rid of that idea of teaching a letter a week as an appropriate way to do it, and moving more toward an interleaving practice where we are exposing kids to multiple letters every day and giving them multiple experiences with them across the entirety of the week is a much more powerful instructional plan than doing that letter a week. Now, part of this alphabetic knowledge is, of course, working with sounds and helping kids begin to understand that these letters function to represent the sounds they hear in oral speech. In American English, we are really going to focus on the ways that we use sounds to help kids read. And for the purposes of teaching reading, we consider American English to contain 44 separate phonemes or speech sounds. So we're going to be focusing in on those 44 different types of sound that we identify in oral language and how they are encoded in letters within graphemes. Now, ideally, language would have a one-to-one correspondence. We could look at a letter and think with certainty that, oh, it represents this sound. Remember that the American English language, we're treating it as though it has 44 sounds. This is a little bit problematic because we only have 26 letters in our alphabet. So those additional sounds come from combining letters to represent phonemes that aren't in those 26 letters of our alphabet. Let me give you a quick rundown of what I mean by this. How do we come to these 44 sounds? Let's consider the letter A, for instance. In these 3 words, 8, pan, and all. In each of these 3 words, we are experiencing a different sound that we can associate with the letter A. In 8, we get that long A sound where it says its name. In pan, we get the short A sound that reminds us of apple. And then in all, we get this AW sound that's different from the first 2. So some letters in our alphabet are going to index more than one sound. Additionally, we're going to come across letters that don't make a sound at all or are silent, such as in the word night of the round table. When we think about this particular word, we see 6 letters, but we really only hear 3 sounds. We're also going to come across instances where there are going to be multiple graphemes that are going to represent only one phoneme. For instance, the F sound in fine is the same sound at the end of cough. The F at the beginning of fine indexes that F sound in the same way that the GH at the end of cough does. And we see this also in the PH in elephant. So the American English language has quite a bit of stuff going on in order to create those 44 different sounds. Now, the nice thing about the American English language is there actually is some logic to it. Despite our histories of being influenced by a variety of other languages, American English has more commonalities than it doesn't. And for teachers, this means that when a grapheme represents more than one phoneme, that there are clues to help indicate which sounds that grapheme represents. A teacher needs to be able to recognize these clues and help students think them through. And that's really what we're going to be working with over the course of this series. And the way that we're going to be working with it is through phonics. If our alphabet represents speech at the level of a phoneme, learning this code is going to require readers to segment spoken words into phonemes and associate graphemes with those phonemes. Phonics is instruction in letter-sound relationships. Here, we're going to be fairly systematic about our understanding of generalizations that we can use to support kids in this work, where we are going to be thinking about letters that are regular in terms of their connection between the letter and the sound, and the generalizations or exceptions that they're experiencing. It's the same kind of systemic approach that you would take in a classroom, where you're thinking about how this knowledge builds upon one another. So as teachers, we are going to study phonics in order to understand the relationship between letters and sounds, while also putting together and blending the sounds represented by those letters. Through these consecutive videos, I am going to guide you through some background knowledge before we dig into specifically consonants, with a varying degree of reliability and dependability before we move into vowel sounds, and then moving into diphthongs, blends, morphemes, etc. So we're going to start with very small units and move bigger and bigger until we get all the way up to morphology.